sometime around the beginning of the 1st century CE, a man was born, probably in southern India, who would go on to become the most important Buddhist thinker since Siddartha Gautama himself. This man, called Nagarjuna, would become the foremost mind in Indian skepticism and change the trajectory of Buddhist thought. There are 2 biographies of Nagarjuna, one in Tibetan and one in Chinese. However, both were composed centuries after his death. As such, it is difficult to know the specific details of Nagarjuna's life. It appears that he was originally from an upper caste Brahminical family. In his youth he was educated in the vast and sophisticated Vedic philosophies which had arisen around the late centuries BCE. However, for some unknown event that led to the conversion of Nagarjuna to Buddhism, and he is said to have studied and taught in Nalanda, which would some centuries later go on to become a great centre of religious and philosophical thought. In his later life, Nagarjuna is said to have gone north and attempted to advise on the courts of warlike princes, attempting to convince them to follow the peaceful path of a Dharma Raja, rather than attempting to expand their power by conquest. Nagarjuna is associated with the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, a large corpus of works which are important in the development of Mahayana, or greater vehicle tradition of Buddhism. According to Mahayana tradition, the Buddha had given out his common teachings to everyone, which had been preserved in the Tripitaka, but had reserved his more refined and esoteric teachings as he was concerned that they would be misinterpreted or misused. The Buddha then supposedly wrote down these teachings and gave them to the Nagas, a semi-divine race of serpent monsters that lived under the ocean. According to legend, Nagarjuna's mystic and religious abilities attracted the attention of these Nagas, who, on finding him suitable, conferred these esoteric teachings, which came to be known as the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Etic scholars have suggested that perhaps Nagarjuna or other authors from within his tradition or amongst his students wrote these sutras and then attributed them to the Buddha to enhance their authority and credibility. Besides his association with the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, Nagarjuna is also credited with an enormous quantity of texts, although the most important of these is the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, or the Fundamental Verses of the Middle Way. It is commonly abbreviated as the MMK. It is in the MMK that Nagarjuna delves into the most important concept of his philosophy, Shunyata. Shunyata, which can be translated as voidness, hollowness, but most commonly as emptiness, is the crowning jewel of Nagarjuna's work. He derived it from the earlier idea of no-self, which is found in early Buddhism. This is the idea that there is no permanent self that exists throughout and beyond a person's life, merely a constantly morphing and changing psychological cluster. Nagarjuna extends this idea from beyond the self to all phenomena. He argues that all things arise due to the prior interactions of dependent phenomena. What this means is that all things, be they rocks, trees, people, or even abstract religious concepts such as samsara and nirvana, have no fixed substance. As such, all things are inherently empty of essence, hence the concept of shunyata often being described as emptiness. In articulating this position of emptiness, Nagarjuna was obviously positioning himself in opposition to factions that already existed. The first of his opponents were the Vedic logicians, those who followed the Nyaya school of Indian thought. Although they were rigorous in their analysis and circumspect with regards to the abilities of human reason, the Nyaya were philosophical optimists in believing that we could discover true essential nature through the faculties of the mind. Against these opponents, Nagarjuna used their own tools, adopting a purely negative and destructive strategy to undermine their positivist position of his philosophical opponents. In doing this, he used the full spectrum of logical arguments and fallacies which he had learnt during his youth. However, it was not only against other faiths to which Nagarjuna turned his philosophical arguments. One of the key opponents he faced was other Buddhist schools, which emerged out of Buddhist scholasticism which had permeated the Abhidharma. In particular, schools such as the Sarvastivada, which held eternalist and substantialist positions with regards to time and self, fell into his sights. Against these opponents, Nagarjuna adopted a tool from the Buddha's own inventory, the quadrilemma. This technique, which had been further developed by Moggaliputtatissa of the Third Council fame, consists of showing the incoherence of a position by testing it against a proposition, the negation of the proposition, both the proposition and its negative, and then neither the proposition nor its negative. Nagarjuna would show the incoherence of the substantialist position by arguing the following. If there is such a thing as fixed essence, then where does change come from? It cannot come from the internal source, nor an external source. Its source cannot be both internal and external, and it cannot be without a source at all. Therefore, the only reasonable expectation is to accept that there is no such thing as an unchanging essence from which phenomena emerge. These positions obviously did not win Nagarjuna many friends amongst Vedic logicians nor Buddhist substantialists. They, along with the first European scholars who read his work, labelled him a nihilist who believed in nothing. However, Nagarjuna didn't see himself as denying the possibility of being, but rather denying the fixed nature of being. Nagarjuna saw himself as cutting a middle path between nihilism, a belief in nothing, on one hand, and essentialism, a belief in fixed nature, on the other. For him, if we are to pursue enlightenment, then we must be an ability to change from something unenlightened to enlightened. Some of Nagarjuna's harsher critics argued that if we were to apply the concept of Shunyata to itself, we would similarly find it devoid of an essential meaning. To this, Nagarjuna placed a position which would come to be known as the doctrine of two truths. The first truth is conventional, Shunyata, that all phenomena are empty of essence. The second truth is the ultimate truth. Later thinkers in the Mahayana tradition would suggest that this truth is the Buddha nature, that we are all capable of and already possess Buddhahood within us. However, to Nagarjuna himself, this ultimate truth is simple, that there was no ultimate truth. Although many later thinkers rejected Nagarjuna's radical position, he certainly did cement himself not as a nihilist, but as the ultimate skeptic of the Indian and Buddhist traditions. Nagarjuna went on to become an incredibly important thinker within the Mahayana movement, founding the first of the two great early Mahayana traditions, called the Madhyamaka, or Middle Path. However, it is difficult to place Nagarjuna squarely within the Mahayana tradition himself. From what little information we have on his writings, there is little to attribute him to any one sectarian affiliation. And it is probable that a hard division between Mahayana and Theravada didn't exist in his lifetime. However, what is clear is that Nagarjuna is a watershed thinker in both Indian and Buddhist philosophy. All the writers that have come after Nagarjuna would have to respond in some way to the skeptical ideas which he had produced.